Hey cousins, welcome to Brown Liquor and Bad Ideas.
Hello, cousins. Welcome to this episode of Brown Liquor and Bad Ideas. I'm your host, Cornell Wright, the People's Lobbyist. And today, let's have a quick one and talk about our continuing needs to work on our democracy. Brown Liquor and Bad Ideas is intended for the participation of responsible adults of legal drinking age who wish to engage in substantive virtual discussions and social drinking for entertainment purposes only. Brown Liquor and Bad Ideas does not advocate the abuse of alcoholic beverages. Choosing to participate in any of the drinking activities shared in the program should be made with moderation and caution and is the sole responsibility of the user. Cousins, democracy is not a passive sport. It's not a passive political system. And we all need to continue to become involved with it because all of our lives and everything we do is associated with the policies and the practices, and more specifically, who we elect into offices, in fact, in order to be able to govern us. We all have known and gone through the 2020 elections, which was certified by the United States Attorney General, the various cybersecurity organizations, multiple Supreme Court cases, multiple recounts in a number of states, and identification by being the most secure election ever, that there's still a question of fraud. Come on, cousins, if ever there was a question that was without any fraud, this might have been the one. And by fraud, I'm talking about anything substantial enough in order to change the outcome, specifically because the only one we're talking about is the presidential outcome, because everyone else who's gotten elected, no one else is coming up saying that they had any fraudulent activities in their elections, right, cousins? Have you heard anybody? So cousins, let me just go through a few of the elected offices that are going to come up in 2022. To my understanding, you can check me on this, and please do to make sure I'm accurate, 34 out of the 100 United States senators are going to be up for election in some of your states. You'll be able to identify that, and they'll be coming around in that time frame for you. All 435 of the seats of the Congress, United States House Congress, are going to be up for re-election in 2022. There are going to be 36 governorships in the United States and U.S. territories up for re-election or election in general. There are going to be attorney generals being elected in 30 states across the country, 30 out of 50. And 3 territories, to my understanding, and 1 federal district will also be getting attorney generals in that election. Cousins, those are your opportunities to start to impact, modify, add, change, or delete, if you will, those folks who are already in those positions. So you ask me, why am I bringing this up to you now? Well, cousins, this now is when you have to start paying attention to what is being proposed by the people who are in office currently, so you have a better understanding of what their opponents are going to be presenting and bringing for you come the actual election time. As well as in almost all the states, there's going to be primaries. And those primaries are going to be people who are going to be coming in either trying to unseat a given person within their given party, or members of the opposite party that aren't in power trying to determine which of multiple candidates are the ones you should vote for. You need to consider and be aware of what some of those issues are, cousins, on the state level, and then, of course, on the national level. As I'm talking to you, I typically kind of talk about those things that are on the national level. Sometimes I delve into global, like global change, climate change, the North Pole, for example, we've covered in past episodes, but also just the general question of what should we start being concerned about and what's holding our democracy together. Cousins, the biggest winner of our democracy failing is not any political party, but it's outside actors who would love to feast on our bones of our democracy. You think about that, cousins. Who's going to win in this whole thing if we allow our democracy and our appreciation of the accuracy of our electoral process and to that to fail? Which is based upon, tell me what it's really based upon. Is it based upon something that we can touch? Something that's been proven? I would suggest not, cousins. So cousins, let me just give you a quick list of some of the things that can be identified and determined on your local level, that being state, and perhaps even your local city, that'll give you a better indication as to what's going on and what is good for you. Now, cousin, There's been conversations over the last almost, year and a half in regards to mask wearing. Mask wearing was never, ever a political question. It has always been a public health question, and whether or not you care enough about yourself, your family, and your community around you to be able to mask up so you can try to prevent them of spreading the disease, which did not care who you were or what party you were. And you look at the almost 570,000 cousins who passed away, they cover everybody, don't they? Aside from which, cousins, is also the question of getting the vaccine, to get inoculated against this thing, vaccinated against COVID. What, so we could suppress it and not have any additional exposures here in the United States. In fact, hopefully, if we got this done early enough, we'd have enough, as we're starting to do now in smaller instances, to be able to help to support the entire world to fight this disease. Cousins, that was not a political question, but you think about how your state handled that. What did your governor say? What did your lieutenant governor say? Did they do what was right to take care of the cousins? And they didn't take care of the cousins, who were they taking care of? Aren't they elected by the cousins? Aren't they supported by the cousins? Weren't they asking cousins to do stuff? So they didn't come up with ideas that were good for the cousins. Who were benefiting from those ideas? Ask them that question, cousins, because that's a really life and death kind of question there, right? Because based upon the actions and determinations by many of the governors across the states, I would contend that we lost cousins as a result of those decisions on the statewide level, not to mention the federal level. That's another whole conversation. So cousins, think about that one. Cousin, there have been coming up some conversations here recently in which discussion about minimum wage, both on the federal level and on the state level. Now, cousins, I know a lot of you have worked for minimum wage. I've worked for minimum wage for a long time. And whenever I had the opportunity to try to move on, I took that opportunity. Why? Because if nothing else, that's what you're supposed to do, right? Continue to try to progress. Well, cousins, if you're in a state in which they are suppressing the minimum wage, what does that tell you about how they feel about you, cousins? More specifically, if some of the, I've heard recently, some of the governors are coming in talking about, well, we want to suspend unemployment assistance from the federal government because we have a shortage in the workforce. Now, cousins, I don't live in those states, so I don't quite understand that. But from the outside, it looks like to me you're refusing free money to give to cousins in your state because you don't want them to go back working for minimum wage, which is lower than what they perhaps need to live on. Cousins, is that right for you? And the other question, cousins, becomes, if you start doing the math, look how much money was being offered at some of those programs. It kind of pretty much got close to $15 an hour. Isn't that a better wage, cousin? And most of the cousins I know, when I was making minimum wage, I nearly spent all the money I had because I had to. Not because I was going around doing a whole bunch of crazy things. I had to spend that money in order to take care of food, housing, a little bit of clothing, and maybe a little bit, at that point in time, much cheaper gas than it is now to put in my car, which was not new. Cousins, those determinations are made at your state level. You can have an impact on that based upon who is the governors and who your House representatives and state representatives within your state. What about health care, cousins? Now, just imagine if we had truly allowed the forces of capitalism to come into play on the COVID-19 vaccination program. What is the value you would place on the vaccines associated with COVID-19? And how much would you have paid to get it in January, as some people did, versus whenever you did have a chance to get the vaccine? Cousins, it was a national protocol. Now, certainly the government helped some of the companies with some money. We tried to help streamline some regulations, part of Warp Speed, and the government did a great job in many instances of helping with the distribution. But cousins, if you had taken a pure hands-off, government's not involved in my life question, what would that have cost you? And would you have been able to afford it? You know the answer to that, cousins. You know the answer. That's just one example, a glaring example of how important health care is and how it could in fact be used in different ways. There were some governors who decided not to accept money on behalf of their cousins when the ACA came out, the American Care Act, okay, because they didn't want their cousins to be impacted by that. Come on, what's a better idea? Has anyone to this day proposed a better idea other than nothing, letting the status quo continue, which is breaking us? There's another conversation. By the way, cousins, I did some research. I watched the program the other day on TV. A lot of states have the stand your ground legislation. Well, fine, but think about that for a second, cousins. If you take stand your ground to not too far from some of the incidences we've seen, then we start having shootouts in the street. Because anybody who threatens me, I could then determine I'm being threatened by them and shoot them because I'm standing my ground. Not in my house. It could be coming out of a convenience store. It could be walking down the street. It could be because I bumped into somebody or they bumped into me and I'm afraid for me at that point in time. Come on, cousins. Because we've seen that logic doesn't always follow in regards to how the use of a handgun. Think about that one as to what the requirements are for that one. Climate change, don't know where you live, but I tell you what, we're getting in, it's May here. California's gonna start to warm up. The Midwest is gonna start to warm up. We're gonna start to get a little dry perhaps. You know, Florida's gonna start moving in. The Gulf's gonna start moving to the hurricane season come a little few months from now, September, October. You tell me whether that's real or not. Talk to a farmer if you don't believe me. They'll tell you. Who's gonna be concerned about it? All those questions, and a couple more I'm gonna give to you. Taxes. Who gets taxed, how much, and for what? Now, there was a tax law that was changed a couple years ago, and it was touted as being this great tax law change. Yeah. It was once again trickled down. Yeah. And by the way, could we have used that money? Yeah. Corporations got tax benefits they weren't even asking for. And if you start looking at it, cousins, you may have gotten a few $100s. The folks who make millions, they got millions of dollars. Does that sound quite right? It's a question. Education, cousins. Now, everybody that I talk to has gone through the pandemic situation and are most concerned about their kids' education. A few years ago, if you remember, there were a number of state unions of teachers that were striking in order to what? To increase their wages as teachers. At that time, I forget where it was, but there was a Republican governor who said that education was a liberal question, that he didn't want to change the amount of money the teachers were getting. Cousins. That's a bad idea. Education is not liberal or conservative. Education is what we need to support and strengthen the country. We need to support and strengthen the country. And now, because of perhaps, I don't know how the various kids, I don't know about the educational aspect, but I can only assume that some kids got more out of the being taught at home over line, some kids got less. As a result, not only just because of the digital divide in which some families have better internet connection and better computers and better schools to deliver, and some has less, there's also just the capability and capacity on the part of the young cousins to be able to accept the educational aspect. There's going to be a further delta. We don't need that because we need to have all of them to be able to go forward and continue to help us with the science, technology, engineering, math, and arts curriculums that we need in order to what? Stay competitive. Because I don't know if you noticed, but China just had a landing on Mars a couple of weeks ago, and they announced they're now going to have a collaboration with Russia in order to have a space station on the on the moon, and China's going to have their own orbital space station not associated with the International Space Station. Come on, cousins. I think we're not winning that one, are we? Not based upon those determinations. And last but not least, cousins, is the voting laws. You can have your own lists. Please put up your own list. Put them on comments, or just think about what's important to you as you start to talk to those elected officials, start to come around and talk to you. But the voting laws are critical. We had more people voting in the last election than we've had in decades. Isn't that not what democracy is supposed to do? You're supposed to have everybody be able to vote and to be able to vote as easily as possible, I would contend. You can't have it be right in some circumstances and not right in others. If we're not smart enough to figure it out, shame on us. Constricting voting is not what democracy needs. That's what totalitarian organizations do. That's not democracy and freedom. So cousins, I want you to start thinking about these things. That's my short list. You have your own. Minimum wage, unemployment, COVID, healthcare, standing your ground, climate change, taxes, education, voting laws. There's others. There's a lot of others. You have those that impact you directly and specifically in your state or your municipality. But all of our representatives are supposed to do what? Represent we the people. So cousins, start getting involved, start paying attention, and let's start figuring out what's best for us in order to help our democracy grow, our country grow, and then help to improve our standing and our lives. Cousins, that wraps it up for today. Remember to wear your mask because the CDC said you need to wear it in certain activities indoors, airplanes, etc., and around people you don't know have been vaccinated. How do you know, right? So, wear your mask, get vaccinated once your opportunity. I'd like for you to like, subscribe to this episode of Brown Liquor and Bad Ideas. Take care of yourselves. Cousins, I forgot something. In middle of June, it will be our first full calendar year and the beginning of our third season. I've often asked you to become more involved with political activities and more involved with how our country works because we are the people. But cousins, I need you also to ask you to help me now because we need to grow our subscribers. So go out and talk to 3 of your friends, have them subscribe, and then we can get to a magic number of 250 by our first annual anniversary. Can you do that for me, cousins? All right, thanks a lot, and you take care of yourselves.
We are the people. We are the people. Welcome to the show.